so grateful that you've joined me for a conversation today about St. John Henry Newman. And for those who are watching and listening, this is Father Peter Stravinskas, who has been reading and learning about St. John Henry Cardinal Newman since he was in about the third grade, when his father used to read passages to him. And he's the founder and superior for the Priestly Society of St. John Henry Cardinal Newman. He's been involved in Catholic education pretty much his entire life, as far as I can tell. He's got a BA in Classics and French from Seton Hall University, a PhD from Fordham University in School Administration, and SDD from the Marian Institute at the Marianum in Rome and University of Dayton. And so thank you for being part of this conversation. Thank you for joining us at the University of Dallas and nurturing our students.
It's my pleasure, and always heard good things. I hate to tell you, but I have my Seton Hall cufflinks on today.
Wow. I should have brought over some UD cufflinks for you. Yeah. You know, we were talking earlier, and it might be good to revisit this. Pope Leo XIV has done something enormous. And he's named St. John Henry Cardinal Newman not just Doctor of the Church, our newest Doctor of the Church, but co-patron of Catholic education. And what do you see behind this? What do you see in front of this? What's the telos that our Holy Father is directing us
Well,
towards?
I think there are a few things converging here. First of all, we have to remember that Pope Leo is an Augustinian. He made a point when he was speaking to university students last week in Rome that he has fond memories of being a young friar, seminarian and priest, teaching math and physics.
Yeah.
So and he comes from a Catholic education family. The father, the mother, one of the brothers, all involved in Catholic education in one way or another. I think that's number one. Number two, I think the disposition of Newman is very similar to his own. It's kind of a calmness to him. I always say, since Leo became Pope, that he exudes confidence, but not arrogance.
Yes.
And he makes people feel comfortable in his presence. And Newman had that quality as well. Newman always talked about the importance of personal influence.
Yes.
And thirdly, that this happens to be the 60th anniversary of Gravissima Educationis, the Vatican II decree on Catholic education,
Yeah.
which shocks people when I say to them, this is the first time, that document is the first ecclesiastical document on Catholic education in the history of the Church.
Right.
We were doing education for 19 centuries, but had never put as a document on it. And I think Pope Leo probably sees or hears echoes of Newman in that document.
Yeah.
And finally, I think he wants to put Newman front and center to try to, recapture a good sense of what Catholic education is all about.
Yes. Well, I'd like to talk about what Catholic education is all about. And I'd also like to explore a little bit the importance of Catholic education across our nation, across the world, right? It matters for the state of our culture to have thriving Catholic schools. In many respects, we're spotty on whether or not Catholic schools are thriving. So what can Newman bring to us anew if we're to really implement his principles in Catholic education today?
Well, you're hitting a number of bases at the same time. I've traveled rather extensively through the Middle East, and I discovered two things. That probably the Catholic schools of the Middle East are the greatest source of potential peace there. And secondly, anytime I encountered a Muslim who was intelligent, open-minded, culturally open, and so forth, they all had one thing in common. They had all gone to Catholic schools. And at one point, I had spent a week in Morocco speaking at a Muslim university. And everywhere I went, the older men, bonjour mon père, because they're all products of the French colonization, or whatever you think of it, but they brought Catholic education to Morocco,
Yes.
and there's still a very strong appreciation for that. In Egypt, it's the same thing, in the Holy Land itself. So I think that's one thing in terms of what, when Pope Benedict came to the States in 2008, and his wonderful talk at Catholic U about Catholic education, he struck a chord similar to what you just said, that a Catholic school nurtures the soul of a nation.
Yes.
And in fact, one of the things I'm going to say to the education department today is, our schools do great things for the church, but we also do great things for the culture at large.
That's right.
And I believe, for example, the reason Roe v. Wade really got overturned was because of the existence of the Catholic school system.
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for that, it never would have been a youth-based movement whatsoever.
Yeah.
And 6 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court are the products of Catholic education.
Right.
One of them not too good, and one of them was a product of Catholic education, but not Catholic.
Yeah.
But you see that influence that's been there,
Yeah.
and when we do it right, it works.
Yes.
And we have others that are not a credit to us, but and then just in terms of, I had a sister who ran the business department of one of the high schools that I had, and she would go around to local businesses in a very non-Catholic and even hostile area and ask them to make contributions to her business department.
Mm-hmm.
And they would say, well, why should I contribute to the Catholic Church? And she said, because you're going to want my girls working for you.
Yeah, there we go. Newman's got a wonderful reflection. I think it's in the 7th discourse in the idea of a university. And it begins with something like this, but a university education is the ordinary means to an extraordinary end. And Newman goes on to list the way in which being well educated, such as within a Catholic university, or Catholic K-12 school, or other schools that bear the stamp of that approach to education, you know how to engage with another individual of whatever class. You're able to engage in those practices that Chesterton describes as arguing without quarreling. Mm-hmm. You're at peace with yourself. You're at peace with others. You're able to get right to the bottom of a particular argument. I've always been struck at the beginning of Parts of Animals when Aristotle describes the goal of education is to be able to identify the truth value of any argument from whatever discipline, right? So that rich approach to education is something we need to make sure that we maintain and strengthen within our Catholic schools and communicate out to schools that are looking to Catholic schools as a paradigm. And it has a profound effect on forming the citizens of our country.
Well, it's, as you know, the university project of Newman didn't go too well ultimately. But when he got back to England, in short order, he decided to open the oratory school.
Yeah.
And he came to the understanding, again, not having grown up as a Catholic, he wouldn't have had this kind of natural intuition for this. But if you want a Catholic university, you need a feeder for it.
Right.
So a Catholic high school needs a feeder from a Catholic grade school, and so on. So this is one consistent, seamless system.
Right.
And so, an institution like yours that, is such a strong Catholic identity and good academics and everything else that goes with it, you also need to be concerned about what can you do to strengthen the high schools.
Right.
And then the high schools in turn, what can they do? And sometimes there's this tendency toward a very unhealthy autonomy of institutions and a disconnectedness, which doesn't help anybody in the process. But I think that, and his oratory school is still thriving,
Thank you for that compliment about the University of Dallas. We were founded with Bishop Gorman had a vision of greatness. He wanted the University of Dallas to certainly serve the local population, but not just that. He wanted us to be a great university. And the original idea was to have a graduate school that offered PhD programs, master's programs. And the model for our brand of graduate school of liberal arts is the educator of the educators. We do produce a lot of teachers, both on the university level, also on the high school level, also on the K-8 level. And that concern for education at every level is, I think, that something that any Catholic university needs to be engaged in. I wonder if could you explain a little bit what an oratory is, right? So people may be familiar with St. Philip Neri and the oratorians, but why did Newman found an oratory? What's distinctive about that approach?
Well, not for the noblest reasons. When it was clear that he was going to swim the Tiber, it was equally clear to him that he wanted to be a priest. And he was kind of, while still in England before going to Rome for that year before ordination, he was throwing around different ideas. And he said he did not want to be a diocesan priest in England because it was highly populated by Irish clergy. Yeah. And he didn't think they had the exact level of class that he was interested in. Yeah. And then his bishop said, well, when you go to Rome, you'll have ample opportunity to look at various orders. Interestingly, he discounted the Jesuits immediately, but I think for different reasons. Yeah. And then the Franciscans and the Dominicans, he wasn't into the mendicant lifestyle. Right. And so he stumbled on the oratory. I guess Pius IX probably said, take a look at them. Yeah. And I always joke that, and the Oratorian vocation is religious life light. So there are no promises, there are no vows. It's a gentleman's agreement. It's really the life of a secular, well, it is the secular clergy. And unfortunately, in the past 50 years, we've lost that term about secular clergy. And now it seems to be, it's always diocesan. But there are, the Sulpicians are secular clergy, the Oratorians are. Right. And so he fell in love with the person of Philip Neri, and he always talks about the joy of Philip. I find it ironic, though. You never find a picture of Newman smiling.
He is described as joyful, but his most striking.
There's no evidence.
I do find, like in my favorite prayer of Newman, "Mission of My Life." Right, there's one hears a lifetime of struggle and of loneliness, and yet there were many people who did count him as a friend. Oh yeah. And I think that friendship is something that we as educators ought to give more thought to. I mean, it seems to me several levels of friendship that ought to be fostered within any Catholic school, but it's C.S. Lewis, Aristotle first, articulate friends as unified through a common desire for the good, right? In the best form of friendship. And unlike in romantic love, where you're gazing into another's eyes, you're standing shoulder to shoulder in pursuit of some good. If you've got a common curriculum, that gives you goods to be explored.
You're talking about this idea of friendship. For decades, I've been suggesting to young priests who are pursuing a graduate degree, what should I write about? And I say, write about friendship. And one priest said to me, with all of the problems in moral theology, you want to talk about friendship? I said, think about this. If you had a good understanding of friendship, there'd be no problems with artificial contraception, abortion, same-sex relations, IVF. I said, all of those things that you're concerned about, and rightly so, the root cause is a misunderstanding or a total lack of understanding of the nature of friendship. Right. And I'm happy to say that 2 years ago, a seminarian was starting on his STL thesis, and I said, do it, and he said yes, and he did a wonderful job on it. But he traced it from Aristotle and Cicero, and all through the medieval period, and And it's critical. And that's Newman.
That's right.
I mean, his famous, his last homily as an Anglican, the parting of friends.
Right.
And, if you want a tearjerker, I mean, here's Newman preaching. And, of course, they say he was not a very elegant preacher, kind of monotone,
Yeah.
but he takes off the Anglican preaching stole and puts it on the altar, and he talks about, and this is the last time you will see or hear from me.
Wow.
And he says that the thing that kept him out of the Catholic Church the longest was not to betray friends.
Right.
So-
Right. Which is a noble
Yeah.
reason. And it's really the case that friendship is it's one of the sweetest things in life, but it's also friendship that is in the very definition of charity, right? So in the Secunda Secundae, question 23, Article 1, Aquinas defines charity as God's friendship with man. And our friendship with others is a participation of that friendship with a God who has deigned to call us friends.
One of the first books I remember reading in grammar school was called The Saints, God's Friends and Mine Too.
Yeah.
And that's what the Commune of Saints is. And that's that great, is it the Giotto
Yes.
fresco? Yeah, the meeting of the blessed in heaven.
Right.
People have this strange idea about heaven. We're all just sitting there, mute, and looking into angelic wings or something.
Yeah.
And that's not our understanding of it.
So how do we foster, in an age where I think young people are often thinking of what they're learning as information mediated through screens.
Yeah.
People are more isolated than they ever have been. What can Catholic schools on whatever level do to be places of fostering genuine friendship?
Well, I think in that horrible tragedy in Minneapolis a couple of months ago now, with the mass shooting at the Catholic school mass, we saw that in action.
Yeah.
With children covering the bodies of other children.
Yeah.
This is nobility, huh?
Right.
And where did they learn that? Well, they had all been introduced to the Dominican Sisters from Weinhauber, that virtue education program that they have,
Right.
which is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
It really is a great program.
And then also the buddy system,
Right.
where an 8th grader is teamed up with a 1st or 2nd grader to keep them well behaved during Mass. But also there's also a sense of responsibility that's there,
Right.
and a friendship develops. And you got to think that the 8th grader is thinking, this is like my little brother.
Exactly.
And that's how they behaved.
Yeah.
So you can see it, and again, it's part of the whole Catholic ethos.
Right.
And I think that's what got so lost in the shuffle in the immediate aftermath of Vatican II. We were told that we were too inward-looking, and the nasty word, it was a ghetto mentality.
Right.
And I find it interesting because, now, we lived in Newark, New Jersey until I was in 5th grade, where I never knew a non-Catholic.
Yeah.
Except for my father's 2 Jewish business partners, right? And then we moved 40 miles south, and the town had the KKK operative there until the 1950s, and they weren't there against blacks or Jews; they were against Catholics, but was able to, through the Catholic culture, not only survive but thrive. And then, interestingly enough, what we've discovered over the years, Father Andrew Greeley, whenever you think of his novels, he was a good sociologist.
Yeah.
And he maintained that people who had gone to 10 years or more of Catholic school were more ecumenically inclined than those who had never gone to Catholic school. And why? Because if you're comfortable in your own skin, you can engage in an intelligent conversation with someone. You don't have to be defensive or offensive, all right, in the process. And people are surprised when they hear that for a period of time in one of the dioceses I worked, I was the director of ecumenism. And they say, you? And I say, yeah. And when I worked for the Catholic League, when I left the position, the three major Jewish organizations in New York gave me awards.
Wow. Yeah.
And but again, that's creating a Catholic culture is critically important.
I agree. I do see a shift, particularly maybe in the last 10 years, a kind of recovery of the recognition that beauty needs to be at the heart of a Catholic revival, which can lead to a revitalization of our broader culture. Catholic schools have a role, it seems to me, in introducing their students to beauty. Certainly, you can do that through art history courses or visits, but what about making beautiful things?
Sure.
What's the role of the studio arts within Catholic education?
Well, the grammar school I went to in Newark, we were taught by the Sisters of Charity of Convent Station, New Jersey, Mother Seton's second foundation. And of course, the university is called that because her nephew was the bishop of Newark.
Yeah.
He named the school after his aunt. But the Sisters of Charity had a very interesting art education program when I was a kid. Every Friday after lunch was art. And these little postcards of famous works of art. And we had to have a binder of some kind. And you had to paste this famous work of art into the side. And on the flip side, you had to, over the weekend, find out, which meant going to a library, the biography of the artist. And then you had to write what you see in the art. And then this is the part that always caused me trouble, was then try to reproduce it. Yes. But it was a wonderful process. And I think it was, attuning us to the artistic, and God the Creator,
Absolutely.
And we co-creators of beauty. And some of John Paul's writings about beauty and art and so forth are just
they're extraordinary, and that's a great art program. Newman doesn't say a whole lot about the fine arts within idea of the university.
I think he took it for granted.
Yes.
The culture at that time.
That's right. People sang, people played instruments, people painted. And I think we have to be quite deliberate now. A contemporary philosopher from whom I've learned quite a bit, Matthew Crawford, has a book, Shop Class as Soulcraft, and then another one, The World Outside Your Head. And he's thinking particularly of the way in which there's a kind of deep knowing when we are fixing things, making things with our hands. But I think the same applies to making art, and it's more important than ever to get young people and older people outside of their heads, away from computers, where you can manipulate digital things and make visualizations that are beautiful. AI, right? You can just order it up. That's stepping over something that's deeply human. And you get to that through the actual fabrication of works yourself. In a way, it seems to me that what Newman is calling us to achieve, and what Pope Leo is, through invoking Newman, calling us to achieve, is an approach to education that humanizes us in ways that other approaches to education just fail to do so.
Well, you use the adjective intentional. I want to do something going a little bit different direction with that. In terms of Catholic schools, I have no problem with any Catholic school having a completely lay faculty. Mother Seton was a lay woman when she started this adventure, and Bishop Carroll kind of pushed her to become a nun and start an order, which is all good. And I would, give my eye teeth to have sisters on the faculty, and they really do something there that's unique. That having been said, we have to have a very intentional approach to the formation of lay faculty. Now, when I was a boy, we had lay teachers in the school, but the school I went to, we had 5 sections of every grade, and we had 3 sisters and 2 lay teachers generally.
Yeah.
But so the 3 sisters had a formation within their own community.
Yeah.
But the 2 lay teachers were then being formed by the 3 sisters.
Right.
And so, but then that all evaporated in the 60s with, the grand exodus of nuns and all that whole sad history that happened there.
Yeah.
And so now I do teacher workshops constantly around the country. I'm saying essentially the same stuff today that I did 40 years ago. When I said it 40 years ago, it was sneers, I say that stuff today, and if they're not doing it, it's not because they're ideologically opposed. It's just ignorance in the Latin sense of the word,
Right.
When I do a Catholic identity workshop for faculty, I have one section I call Breathing Catholic Air.
Yeah.
And I say, it's not a checklist. There's a crucifix in the room, there's a statue of Our Lady. It's much more than that. It's an atmosphere and so forth. And I said, for example, if you're teaching history and an ambulance goes by, you say, boys and girls, put this down. Let's pray for the sick person, pray for the medical personnel. Or you're in the middle of a math class and the church bell tolls for a funeral mass. Let's pray for the repose of the soul. And this young woman in the front row starts weeping inconsolably, and I thought, what did I say? And are you okay? She said, yeah. And I said, well, what? She said, Father, that's so beautiful. Now, she wasn't doing it, not because she thought it was a stupid thing to do.
She just never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's also part of recapturing the Catholic culture.
And I think that's a real sign of hope, right? I mean,
oh yeah,
without a doubt. I had many teachers in grade school and then university who really wanted to sneer at the sorts of things that you're describing, and things are very different now.
Yeah.
People are hungry. They're looking for deep roots, and thanks be to God, we still have a lot of people who want to teach within Catholic schools. They want the formation.
Sure. Yeah.
They're hungry for it, and that I think is a
well. I
great
think
sign
too.
of hope.
Sometimes things have to hit rock bottom before a change can be effected. Cardinal Aurelius in Scandinavia, I thought he was actually a contender to be wearing white.
Yes.
And he would have been good. He's a convert from Lutheranism. He's a Carmelite. But I saw a conversation with him recently, well, about a year ago, in which he said, everybody knows the sexuality in Scandinavia has been out of control for decades. And he said, it's at a point now where young people are constantly going to Catholic rectories and say, can you tell us about the Catholic vision of sexuality? They realize whatever it is that they've been fed is not good, and so let's try something else.
Yeah, chaos isn't working. How about some order? So, yeah. Well, thank you for joining me in conversation. Thank you for this is your first visit to the University of Dallas. We're blessed to have you, and thank you for a lifetime devoted to reviving and strengthening Catholic education.
It's my pleasure. And God bless you for the wonderful work you do here.
Well, thank you.
May your tribe increase.
Yeah, thank you. We're working on that.